Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, find us. So this is Battlefield 1, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the proactive playstyle. And simply put, we're going to be talking about this for two reasons. The first is that, well, it's about time I made a video on this, given how many times I've mentioned this in various weapon reviews or weapon showdowns, and there's been at least a few of you in the community who've wanted me to talk about this topic for quite some time. And the second is the North Sea update, and the time to kill changes it has brought make a playstyle such as this a more aggressive playstyle, far more relevant, far more beneficial than previously under a slower time to kill model. And why that exactly is, we will come to a little bit later on in this video. To start things off nicely, however, let's define the proactive playstyle. Well, it's nicely within the definition of proactive itself, essentially a person or action, in this case it's us as players, creating or controlling a situation rather than simply responding to it after it has happened. This nicely sums up really what the proactive playstyle is all about. It's about you being the person engaging your enemies instead of being engaged, and the benefits that come with that. Now, the foundation of this playstyle is all about taking advantage of two key things: peeker's advantage and lower reaction times for a player who's engaging versus the player who's being engaged. The first is quite simple to explain. Peeker's advantage is based in the fundamental workings of how FPS games operate. Essentially, if you are behind cover, somebody else is somewhere else on the battlefield, well, they can't see you because you're behind cover. If you then choose to, for example, leave that cover or peek out from behind it to engage that person, well, they won't actually see that happening before your computer or your console has sent that information to the server has processed it and sent it back to that person being engaged. Therefore, there's a period of time where you have an advantage over that person when it comes to their knowledge of your positioning, their knowledge of you shooting at them. That small time period can very frequently, actually still in Battlefield 1, make a big difference to the outcome of firefight, especially with a lower time to kill as we have it now. Now, the lower reaction times or lower relevant reaction times are quite simply based in observation and logics when it comes to FPS gaming. If you are a player engaging somebody, you know you're going to engage them, you're just waiting for the perfect moment, you then start pulling the trigger, well, your reaction time is essentially that of your brain deciding now's the time to go, and then that process actually happening. Whereas the person being engaged, who most likely doesn't know your position, actually first has to react to being engaged, then has to figure out where he's being engaged from, at what distance, whether or not it's worth going for cover because there's cover close by, whether or not he can actually return fire in any effective way. If he's a sniper and you're an assault player and you're in close quarters, likely the answer is no. If the situation is of course the other way around, then maybe he should rather try to engage you than simply hiding behind cover, in the case that, for example, you're an assault player punching above your weight at a long range target. All these processes take time. Their reaction time is generally not going to be as good as yours simply deciding to pull the trigger. It's a much simpler process, and therefore in both of these instances, both of these foundations give you essentially a small advantage over your enemy when it comes to time to react. And the result of that is simply you having a faster applied time to kill than they do, because before they start shooting, before they can react properly, well, you've already put half of your magazine in them and they've already suffered quite a bit of damage. Therefore, this playstyle is all about taking advantage of being the aggressor instead of the one being engaged. Now, why would you bother with such a playstyle? Why am I bothering making a video about something that you may think is unnecessarily being complex about something as simple as a first-person shooter? Well, in practice, what this means is it doesn't just decrease your time to kill on target, it also makes you a more effective user of every single one of the weapons you possibly could use. It benefits all weapons, it benefits you as player as whole. However, it benefits certain weapons specifically more than others. A bar, for example, 1918 Storm, is a good weapon and is a better weapon to use with a proactive playstyle like this. The autoloading A35, on the other hand, is a horrible weapon if used in a reactive playstyle. However, suddenly a god tier weapon if used in a proactive playstyle. The difference here is not a matter of, good to better. The difference here is awful to great. And therefore, engaging with concepts like these are very relevant for those who wish to master slightly harder to use weapons, or especially weapons with lower magazine sizes in Battlefield 1. Now, enough talk around what it's based on and why it's so beneficial. Let's talk about how you actually go about using or engaging in this proactive playstyle instead of a reactive playstyle. Now, reactive playstyle is quite simply essentially running in there and just getting shot, reacting to other enemies suddenly showing up in front of you, or even worse, already shooting at you. That's simple. The proactive playstyle is a little bit more complex, hence not everybody engages in it. And there's two key core elements to it, at least in my opinion. Movement and enemy positioning. Those are at least the main parts of successfully being a proactive player on the battlefield instead of a reactive player on the battlefield. So when it comes to movement, things like simply avoid being engaged and instead facilitating engagements yourselves. This can mean flanking. This can mean positioning yourself behind good cover. This can mean positioning yourself at a distance at which your gun is ideal for the engagement. So with something like an auto-loading 835, that's medium range. With something like an automatical, that's extreme close quarters, but maybe not sub 10 meters, where shotguns maybe are the better choice of weapon. Therefore, movement and getting yourself in your ideal engagement distance or in a beneficial position is vital to being a proactive player. That is the definition of being proactive. It's changing the situation to your benefit. But there's another element to this that is important. That's constantly changing your position and trying to avoid detection, because proactive playstyle isn't just simply about facilitating an advantage to you. Your biggest advantage is where you can take out a target without them knowing that you're coming. You choose to engage that target, they don't choose to engage you. Therefore, moving around, constantly changing your position is equally an important part of the movement category when it comes to that proactive playstyle instead of that reactive playstyle. Another element I've just put under movement because, well, it's only slightly connected to movement is pre-aiming and pre-firing. Essentially, position yourself in a way that's going to give you an advantage, even in close quarter situations. If you know you're in a trench, you know somebody's going to come around that corner because you can hear them, you see them on your minivac. The proactive playstyle is not to run around the corner. The proactive playstyle is also not to run away. The proactive playstyle is to set yourself up in a way that is going to give you an advantage. So possibly rounding that corner just as they do, knowing that they're coming by pre-firing. You are then engaging that target before they likely knew that you were actually there. That's the close quarter application of something like the proactive playstyle when it comes to movement. Now, the second element, as already said, is enemy positioning. Where is the enemy at all times gives you a massive advantage. There's a reason why wall hacks are such a great hack to have if you're playing any kind of shooters, and while wall hackers generally tend to get ridiculous scores. Well, they usually come along with damage hacks and aim hacks, but let's not talk about that necessarily today. The wall hack is so advantageous because enemy positioning is vital to being a successful FPS gamer, and this is basics, but this is very crucial to being a proactive player. If you know where the enemy is, you can choose to engage them, or you can choose to avoid them. Maybe in the case that there's 5 of them and you've got a weapon like the auto-loading 835 and in close quarters, you stand no chance at taking out 5 people at once. Even now with the improved time to kill, no weapon is generally going to win a 5-on-1 in close quarters. Therefore, enemy positioning is extremely vital to actually allowing you to take advantage of the core element of a proactive playstyle of being the one to engage your target and not being the one engaged. Well, where do you get this information from enemy positioning? Well, the most easy and the obvious source is minimaps, spots, as well as friendly deaths. If you see that one of your teammates has died in, for example, a trench leading straight to an objective, you can be damn certain that somebody is in that trench walking towards the next objective. Use that information to your advantage. Set yourself up in a position where you can ambush them or let them walk by you without them seeing you, even better, and then shoot them in the back for maximum effectiveness, and likely without them having a chance to properly respond to you shooting at them. Another important source of enemy positioning, however, because the minimap obviously does not show all players, only those that are spotted, is sound. Listening to footsteps in Battlefield 1 is easier than most FPS games, I think it can arguably be said. They've been deliberately exaggerated by DICE's sound team to allow players who take advantage of positional audio to actually figure out where they are. And you don't need the most amazing headset in the world, you don't need 7.1 surround system to make use of this. Simply listening and taking advantage of sound already on a very basic level will allow you to pinpoint enemies better and understand what's going around you when it comes to enemy movements, independent of what it says on the minimap, for example, where they're not spotted. Last then, of course, and this is likely the most difficult to achieve because it is based simply in time, is map knowledge. This comes with time and experience, knowing how players move through a map, how players position themselves behind what cover, at what ranges, knowing where, for example, assaults are, knowing where scouts or support players generally tend to be on any given set objective. This is something you can't, study a book for or generally just put in your mind and take advantage of. This is something that comes with time and with experience of playing Battlefield 1. But cumulatively, with the information provided by the minimap, as well as the positioning from the sound, you can start to have a very good idea of exactly where most, if not all, enemies are in your surrounding. And this kind of information is extremely powerful. It allows you to put yourself in places where you can take on targets you wouldn't otherwise be able to take on. It allows you to survive longer, and it most importantly facilitates you engaging the target instead of you being engaged by them, mostly of course, or in the worst case scenario, by surprise. So, having talked then about the basics, the fundamentals, and how to go about playing proactively in Battlefield 1, well, what is the consequence of all this nice fancy stuff? Well, first of all, as already mentioned, it's a time to kill advantage over enemies. It means your time to kill, generally, is lower than theirs because you're the one engaging that target. You don't first have to figure out where exactly you're being engaged from, by who, with what weapon. And this, of course, is all the more relevant with a lower time to kill model that we now have. The lower the time to kill, the more important it becomes who is the first to shoot, because the less time that person has to react before they're actually dead, the less time they have to spot you, which of course gives up your position, the less time they have to injure you even if you get the kill, which in a case where you are not a medic means that you are for longer periods of time now a soft target for other players, especially those pesky scout players at long range, which if you're not 100 health can generally just body shot you at any given range with most of their weapons. Now further to that, also the result of this playstyle, besides of course the obvious, is the more effective use of your weapon, and this does apply to every single weapon. If you're the one choosing your engagements, if you're doing it correctly, you're choosing engagements that are beneficial to your weapon, at the ideal engagement distance, the ideal number of targets, etc. And this, of course, as already mentioned, applies most to weapons such as the autoloading 835 or Serbstarter 1906, the skill cannon category of weapons as whole, because they of course often have quite difficult requirements to be used in the most effective way without incurring their otherwise quite hefty drawbacks. Now, defining and explaining the proactive playstyle can be quite difficult in many ways. I've done my best in this video to do it, and you can't always apply it. Inevitably, sometimes you're going to be surprised by a shotgun user, or surprised by somebody using a scout weapon, for example, at his ideal engagement distance with a sweet spot. There's nothing you can do about it, but you can strive to be a proactive Battlefield player, and it will generally lead to you putting yourself more often than not in advantageous situations over your enemies. If you'd have to summarize the whole proactive playstyle, how you go about implementing it on the battlefield, I'd say seek out the enemy, choose to engage the enemy, and kill the enemy. That's the simplest way you can essentially summarize a proactive playstyle instead, of course, the opposite, the reactive playstyle. Now, I'd love to hear your opinion on this playstyle, on this matter, as well as, of course, your experiences and your usual video suggestions. So leave those down below in the comments or hit me up with them on Twitter. If you enjoyed the video, found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.